Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted that you're here. Forgive me for speaking in the back, but I think you probably all can hear.
Yes.
Is that so?
Yes.
Are there more chairs?
It is a great honor for me to introduce to you our very distinguished guest, Nancy Reynolds. Nancy was a student at the School of American Ballet and a dancer at the New York City Ballet, and she is now Director of Research for the Balanchine Foundation. Nancy has done an astounding work by inventing remarkable programs and an archive which preserves and conveys for posterity the essence of the creative inventions of George Balanchine. He lived from 1904 to 1983, for all generations of dancers to come. His legacy will continue to live in Repertory, passed on from old to young, by the inventions and coordinations by Nancy Reynolds. His legacy will continue to live in perpetuity. This archive will serve as a mapping out of Balanchine's entire life for us all, and the means for understanding for artists to come now and to come. Actually, the performing of his works is the immediate means of realization of his ideas, and I hope that you will find ways to see his ballets in Boston, New York, and other venues across the country. There's much more to say about Nancy Reynolds, but I will let her talk for you, and there she is.
Okay, so am I loud enough, soft enough,
Yes.
okay enough? Okay, well, you say there's a lot more to say about me, but there's much, much more to say about Balanchine. In fact, it'd be impossible to begin to cover him in an hour, or, I mean, there are books and books and so on and so forth. In short, he was a major figure of 20th century ballet, which probably most people here know, but I don't quite know the level of knowledge here, so if I repeat something you already know, I apologize. So, a seminal figure in 20th century ballet. He was extraordinarily prolific. He choreographed over 400 works, primarily ballets, but also dances for opera, movies, and the commercial theater. For almost 50 years, he was artistic director and chief choreographer of the New York City Ballet and its predecessor companies, because it took a while for New York City Ballet itself to come into focus, shall we say. But anyway, for all of that activity, all those ballets and all that directing and all that creative work, he considered himself above all a teacher, saying, I am a teacher, that is my contribution. It's not too much to say that although his works were firmly grounded in the classical ballet technique, over the years he conceptualized a unique approach to that technique. I think there's a book back there that shows Balanchine teaching, actually, by Mrs. Lassalle. He conceptualized a unique approach to that technique, which today has many followers. His teaching has borne fruit. And tonight I will speak about his artistic importance, both in his own day and the present, and look a little more closely at two of his ballets, and a note about his working methods and the practical side of preserving his ballets. So I've been asked to give a little history. Again, if you've already heard it, well, you'll have to hear it again. You may already know this, but in any case. Okay, so Balanchine was of Georgian extraction, born in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1904, and died in New York City in 1983. Until almost the very end of his days, he was active creatively. His father was a composer, sometimes referred to as the Georgian Glinka, and was often away from home doing research in Georgia. At the age of 9, Balanchine was accepted as a boarding student at the ballet section of the Imperial Theatre School in St. Petersburg. With this effect, one might also say that he effectively lost his mother as well as his father, because he was away from home from a really early age, and I bet it was just speculation, a lonely childhood. I don't know, but I would imagine the stage was set for that kind of a life. The world-famous theater school, supported by the Tsar, offered a strict multi-year curriculum of classical ballet technique, mime, music, languages, and other academic subjects, and gave the students performing experience in children's roles at the famed Mariinsky Theater in such ballets as The Sleeping Beauty, which was Balanchine's favorite, he said. In addition to his dance studies at some point in his teenage years, Balanchine, who had begun piano lessons at the age of 5, enrolled in the Petrograd Conservatory of Music, receiving what is probably the most thorough musical education of any choreographer. He was later called by Stravinsky a supreme musician. By then he had also started to choreograph, still in his teens, he hadn't even graduated yet, creating experimental pieces on some of the students. In 1921 he graduated with honors from what was by then, in the wake of the Russian Revolution, called the Petrograd Theater Ballet School. Originally the Imperial, no longer. And he soon joined the corps de ballet of the newly named State Theater of Opera and Ballet, formerly Mariinsky. So when you're doing research in this area, you kind of wonder exactly what thing you're talking about, which name is why and when and so on. Anyway, so at that time it was called the State Theater. He, with some other students, he created a small troupe and did some experimental work outside official auspices. But in his second performance, it was denounced by the theater management, and the participants were threatened with dismissal from the main company if they continued. These were students, young students, not students anymore, young members of the corps de ballet. Seeking a way out, in 1924, he and a few others were permitted to leave the newly christened Soviet Union for a tour of Western Europe. They did not return. They were soon engaged by the renowned impresario Serge Diaghilev to dance, and in Balanchine's case, to choreograph for Diaghilev's troupe, the Ballet Russe, which played a major role in bringing Russian ballet standards to Western Europe. During his 5-year tenure with that company, Balanchine choreographed 2 of his lasting masterpieces, Apollo of 1928 and Prodigal Son, 1929, in addition to several other things. But those 2 ballets are still performed today. Diaghilev died in 1929, same year as Prodigal Son, and his company just disappeared, just collapsed completely. Lacking steady employment, suddenly, Balanchine was without a job. He survived by working in London music halls, at the Royal Danish Ballet, the new Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, which was created in the Diaghilev image, and the short-lived ballets of 1933. After a post-performance party of that company in London, he was introduced to the American arts patron Lincoln Kirstein. And the rest, as they say, is history. Kirstein envisioned establishing a ballet company in America, which was virtually virgin territory at the time in dance terms, a company to consist of American dancers that was not dependent on repertory from Europe. Balanchine signed on, arriving in New York in October 1933. But first to school, he is reported to have said. We don't know whether he actually said that, but that was the idea. Well, with Diaghilev, who had been exiled from Russia for many years, he had trouble toward the last years getting new dancers because he wasn't in touch with Russia anymore. And anyway, so it was quite obvious that a school was needed to continue the supply of dancers. So at any rate, within a year, the School of American Ballet, Balanchine's teaching academy, was opened. And then his first choreography, which came soon after, the Serenade in 1934, to the music of Tchaikovsky. With this ballet, he clearly announced his principles of what his ballet was supposed to be. It would feature the use of serious concert music as accompaniment, full participation of the corps de ballet. They didn't just stand around on the edge, but they really got in there. De-emphasis on costumes and scenery, and often the absence of plot or even theme. Being a genius, of course, he did not always follow his own prescriptions. He was far too wide for that. Balanchine and Kirstein together, working together to create an American ballet company, ran into some snags. It took them a while to get this thing off the ground. But stability was achieved with the founding of the New York City Ballet in 1948. So this from 34 to 48, things were not really in place. The company is now in its 70th year, far outlasting Balanchine's lifetime. Although a number of choreographers have contributed to the company over the years, chief among them, Jerome Robbins, it was and remains Balanchine's company, a laboratory for his inventions, even well past his own life. Balanchine revolutionized the technique and style of classical ballet. That term, classical ballet, can be interpreted in several ways, but the most familiar is based on the ballet technique that reached its apex in 19th century Russia, a technique combining grace, delicacy, and strength. Examples can be seen in such well-known ballets as Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, and Nutcracker. Some characteristics of this classical high style are, you probably know some of this, but anyway, complete turnout of the legs and feet from the hips, rounded arms, and a somewhat upright vertical position of the body. An aerial rather than a grounded impetus was his focus. Taking this classical technique as his base, Balanchine subjected it to, if that's the right verb, various inversions, distortions, reaccentuations, and unexpected sequences of steps, which resulted in a greater dynamism of movement and a modification of traditional classroom correctness. He used turn-in positions of the arms and legs, angular geometric configurations, and emphasized speed and attack. In some of his later ballets, his classical foundations are less obvious, but are always either apparent or implied. So that's a little bit of background. Now I will show you an excerpt from one of Balanchine's earliest reinterpretation of these givens, The Four Temperaments, to music of Paul Hindemith, created in 1946. You will note that the legs and feet are often turned in, the feet flexed rather than pointed, the arms often not rounded but straight, and the body often not centralized but off balance. Today, these elements are by no means the exclusive province of a Balanchine ballet. And he did not really invent 20th century American classicism all by himself. There were others, but he is considered the foremost exponent of what has become to be called neoclassicism, or classicism seen through new eyes. And now we'll have Four Temperaments. Just a small section. mix in with his own inventions. It's a pretty unusual exit. Okay, we can stop that. Okay, we turn that off.
You say who the dancers were?
Yes, I can, actually. The first two were Carol Sumner and William Westlow. Next was Marnie Morris and Earl Sieveling. And the last one was Suki Shorer and Raymond Sagara.
And when was that? What year was that?
Oh, what was it televised? I'm not sure.
Oh.
I meant to look that up.
60s.
They may not even have said it on the cover. They often kind of are coy about when the videography took place. I would imagine, considering who those people are, sometime maybe late 60s. Yeah.
Earl Siebling was from the Boston Ballet.
Oh.
He trained in Boston with Virginia Williams. And Suki Shore is still teaching at the school.
Absolutely, yep. So, just to state the obvious, you'd have to have classical training to do ballets like that, even if some of the steps were kind of, turned in and different, and those funny pirouettes on a bent knee. I mean, they're, you can't just knock them off. Okay, so let's see. So Balanchine will be best remembered for these spare modern ballets, often to reductive music and with minimal costumes and sets. That ballet actually originally had costumes, but he threw them out. They were much too distracting. No, really, they were on for about 2 years. And then we got down to leotards, which at the time was quite unusual. Not unprecedented, but quite unusual. In any case, so among these were included not only four temperaments, these sort of reductive ballets, agon, movements for piano and orchestra, duo concertante, Stravinsky violin concerto. But he had a vast stylistic range. There's the jazziness of Rubies from Jewels, set to Stravinsky, the serenity of Chaconne, set to Gluck, the mystery of Ivesiana's unanswered question, in which the ballerina never touches the ground, and the ritual of a Japanese-inspired wedding rite in Bugaku, and much, much more. So from this vast cornucopia, I will now show one of Balanchine's most intimate ballets, one that defies categorization within his oeuvre. It is Sonatine, with music by Ravel, choreographed in 1975. While Balanchine was once considered cold and cerebral, particularly in the early years of the 20th century, when his colleagues for the most part were concentrating on story ballets and highly decorative costumes and scenery, a closer look reveals that he could be warm, romantic, and even sentimental. I chose to show the next selection, Sonatine, because it is so quiet and unusual. And I also figured most of you, if any, none of you perhaps had seen it. And also because it features one of Balanchine's most beloved ballerinas, or most individual dancers, the beloved Violette Verdi. I understand that some of you may have known her during her tenure as artistic director of Boston Ballet, 1980 to 1984. It shows off Verdi's musicality and eloquence of gesture to a remarkable effect. And the male dancer is Jean-Pierre Bonfou, who is also no slouch. They're both French, and Ravel is French. Yeah, but Balanchine was really good at capturing nuances of character and movement and so on. So, let's show Sonatine. The print is not, this is a film taken in '75, and it's not the best quality, but it is the original cast.
Oh, no.
really special, really special. And the thing that was interesting about her, she's French. She didn't have his training, but she managed to bring a tremendous amount to his ballets, as you can see. I was going to say, oh yes, when asked what qualities she was called on to dance sonatine, Verdi's first thought was strong ankles. Addressing one of his dancers, Balanchine once said of this work, "Dear, it's not really a ballet, it's the perfume of Ravel." I thought it might be interesting for you to get an idea of the working methods of Balanchine, and so I will now show excerpts from an interview with Melissa Hayden, who was the greatest dramatic ballerina in New York City Ballet in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. I might add that contrary to popular opinion as to the attributes of a so-called typical Balanchine ballerina, specifically a tall, slim woman with endless legs, both Hayden and Verdi were quite short, and Hayden had rather broad shoulders. The truth is that Balanchine choreographed for dancers of varied physiques, from the delicate to the Amazonian. So we'll show the Hayden interview. I happen to be the interviewer, that's not why I chose this, but I chose it for her. But anyway, we can run the next thing. Sorry, she was talking about Stars and Stripes. And her partner in that was Jacques d'Amboise.
I think we can fairly say that Stars and Stripes is a salute to
I think it needs to be a
America.
little louder.
And Mr. Balanchine was very interested in America as his adopted country. Wouldn't you say so? Can you talk a little bit about his Western shirts or, other
Yes,
ways
well, the
that...
thing with Mr. Balanchine, I think he was very proud to be an American, but, given his presence in everyday life or in the studio, he never talked about it. And I think doing Stars and Stripes indicated, he then expressed himself to the world, I'm so proud to be an American. It was so marvelous and touching. I think,
the opening night, he came back to say, two ladies were in front of me, and they started to cry. I think, isn't that wonderful? That's in a sense, that's the way he felt. Wonderful. Because when we did Stars and Stripes for the first time, it was kind of a very, I would say, an important statement from Mr. Balanchine. And he was so pleased that everybody accepted it in such a responsive manner because the ballet was a big success. We danced it everywhere and all over. He was very proud of Stars and Stripes.
Now, when he began to do the choreography, your part, did he say anything to you beforehand about what he had in mind?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
That was something about Mr. Balanchine never communicated verbally. You got what his intention was in a classroom, in a studio, and when he started with you, he would be very gentle. Perhaps we would do it like this.
Yes.
So it was slight tongue-in-cheek right from the beginning, and that proved to be the way we did it.
Well, I was going to comment on that, and I was wondering, did Balanchine put that into your mind at all, or was that something the two of you kind of...
I would say there's something wonderful about Balanchine. When he picks people and chooses a person or people to work with, he already has an understanding of you as a person.
Your qualities.
My qualities. And so I always considered myself the most dramatic dancer in New York City Ballet up to a point.
Yes, yes.
But this was a little bit, I think he saw in me perhaps a sense of humor, and it worked. So he didn't really say anything. It's something that happened within the choreography between the two dancers. Now, that was the amazing thing. And it just like that. He never said anything to Jacques. He never said anything to me. But in doing it and relating the choreography, we have to respond this way to each other.
Because you
any
had
other
things
way.
like gazing into his eyes. for
Yes,
instance.
and there were moments where we stood and looked at each other. And then, tongue-in-cheek, romantically, but sassy-like.
Yes,
Flirtatious.
yes.
Flirtatious. So, not in a dramatic way, flirtatious, coquettish way.
Very lightweight, yeah.
Very light. And I enjoyed dancing that so much. I enjoyed dancing in such a difficult choreography. It's a pounding kind of aerobic.
Well, why don't we talk a little
Dance.
bit about what are the most difficult parts?
Well, you know, when you're being created on, you have, of course, with Balanchine, it has a beginning, middle, and it does. It has a flow.
Sorry, it's supposed to be end.
Whatever you do, whether you've ever done a particular movement before, when you're doing it and learning it for the first time, it might be difficult. But as you do it, it becomes the most natural thing. So, and logical. So, with the choreography, it developed into such a logical continuity that when it became the difficult movements, they were just a continuation of that continuity. And some of the movements are really quite intricate and never been danced before or choreographed.
Well, I think certainly some of the pas de deux movements you
Yeah.
showed today, the difficult balances and
The turns.
well, a lot of these, like
And
the
not
fouetté and
the fouettés, and also I
And the
must
man
say,
steps
and the
back.
man not being right behind the dancer all the time.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the one thing about Balanchine was using dancers with each other, men and women. I don't think Mr. Balanchine thought it was the right thing for a man to stand behind a woman, to be absolutely covered, or I mean,
like a
hidden.
pillar of support. It was
Hidden or
more
pillar,
subtle,
it had to have movement with each other.
Yes.
So that there is a part in the pas de deux where I do double pirouette into a narrow basket, he's not quite
He's miles
near.
away.
He's miles away, and the
George,
timing,
yes.
and the timing of it just meets together, so it becomes very exciting for the dancers, also for the audience. It's
Sure.
just think, will they get it, will they make it, and they do. There are accents in the orchestration that he sometimes uses, and sometimes it can come out as a count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, 4, 5, 1. So you have 1 and a 5 as an accent, but the music is written 1, 2, 3, 4, 1,
Right.
2, 3, 4.
That.
But the choreography is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2.
I think non-dancers
And
don't
so
realize all
dancers,
this.
but they have to do.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty, you know, that's the thing that preserves Mr. Balanchine's choreography. It's not steps. Choreographer has not to do with vocabulary, plie, tendu, rond de jambe, grand battement. It has to do with the design of that vocabulary. So it's not vocabulary anymore. It does go beyond the mechanics of it, and it makes something. It makes a statement, it makes a phrase. It has an accent, like just orchestral music, you know?
Right.
So
One of his-
therefore, and that's part of which I've always appreciated, is his musicality, the musicality of the choreography, and it, for me, was never difficult. It was so logical. Of
Yes.
course, if you hear that, of course you do it on 5. And you have to get there, and then go 1 right away. The most exciting part of my life with New York City Ballet was doing anything, was that rehearsal room. Standing in that room alone when he was doing a piece for me and saying, now, maybe we'll do like this. And he would use his fingers doing everything, you know, figure it out. And then you get something. It is most exciting. I had an opportunity to work with him on a very important piece of choreography in a studio where the pianist didn't appear. And Mr. Balanchine didn't want to waste this time, and he sat down at the piano and started playing the music, and he got up, and he said, maybe we try this. Just use the counts. We'll count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Went back to the piano, and it was repeated. Went back to the piano, played it, and the movement fit the count.
Well, now, when you were rehearsing stars, did he partner you also?
We tried, yes. It was interesting. There's a step that he tried out with Jacques, and it was quite difficult. Actually, for the partnering, not so much for the girl, because instead of doing a double pirouette and piqué with a passe position, it was plie and piqué and an arabesque turn. If you finish the turn, the boy had to come in and time it and continue the promenade. Now, if he came in too closely, you'd fall off. If he came in too, wasn't close enough, you'd be reaching and you'd stop the turn. It wasn't, you know, so we tried that with Jacques a little bit, and it somehow that didn't work out. We worked at it more than he usually did for a step. It didn't work out, so we ended up with what we're doing here now, the bourrée and chassé, tombé, double pirouette around that promenade.
Well, that was the
That
thing,
was
he
changed.
always find an alternative,
Yes,
right?
he did.
Something didn't work, he said, well, just throw it out and use
Yes,
something new.
exactly.
Yeah. But did he actually do the partnering with
He
you?
did it, he could do it with me.
Oh, he could do it.
Oh, of course, that's why he thought Shaw could do it. He didn't ask anybody to do something that he couldn't do. He's a marvelous partner.
Yeah,
Oh,
I've heard that.
fabulous partner. You could do things with him without, just hold your position, and he'd have you all over the place, and he'd go, wow.
And, yeah. So that's one view of what it was like. I'm glad, of course, she mentioned music and the complicated counts and stuff, because I haven't gone into that at all. But he was an exceedingly musical choreographer, and the way he fit notes to steps to notes was never, or not ever, but often not, you know, they didn't match exactly. They were sort of a little bit off, only they weren't really off. But anyway, it was quite a challenge to dance that stuff, and it certainly made him outstanding. And how are we doing on time? I've got one more little thing to say, and then we could take questions if there's time. Or I've been asked to speak about Balanchine's legacy and the practical side of preserving his ballets and encouraging their performance. In earlier days, actually from time immemorial, dances were preserved by passing them down person to person or person to group in the studio. In addition, perhaps the choreography or ground plan was written down, perhaps, or indicated with diagrams or sketches or in one of the various forms of notation, most of which have been lost or undecipherable. Considering that also the choreography may have been forgotten by the successors to the original teachers and interpreters, or due to unstable finances or ephemeral nature of many ballet companies, not to mention deterioration of scores, costumes, decor, acts of nature, fires, floods, etc. It's not surprising that a large part of, a great deal of pre-19th century material has disappeared. A later part of the 19th century, especially in Russia, has a better record, thanks, among other things, to notations of Imperial Russia's crown jewels, again, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, and Nutcracker, which were smuggled to the West. That's how they're very well known over here now. I mean, they were well known in the 20s, when the Russians themselves were not appearing. The eventual reopening of Russian research collections after closure during World War II and the Cold War revealed that there were legible notations of several other ballets in the vaults. Then the arrival of the moving image film and the early part of the 20th century and videotape provided additional tools, and videotape was so inexpensive and instant that almost any person, much less any company, could perform it, could use it. So let's see here, we have, at the time of retrospective called a Balanchine celebration in 1993, 10 years after his death, it was estimated that of his output of 400 works, 75 could still be performed. This was partly due to the stability of the New York City Ballet, which provided his works a home, partly due to the ballet's exposure on television, especially in the 60s and 70s, and partly due to Balanchine's Lend-Lease program, initiated in the 50s, of staging his ballets under contract and with royalties for other companies. Compare the 75 figure with today's handful of performable works by Mikhail Fokine, and Leonid Messine, two of the most important ballet choreographers of the early 20th century, of which we have almost nothing. In 1987, the Balanchine Trust was formed, especially to control the dissemination of Balanchine ballets, all of which are copyrighted. The Trust licenses the ballets for performance and keeps a stable of approved rehearsal masters on hand to set them. As always, as ever, the process still involves a person-to-person exchange. They don't set them for video. Fees are kept modest to encourage companies to mount and perform the works under a license that generally lasts 3 years before a review by a trust representative is required. Since the trust's formation, several other choreographers have followed suit, including Merce Cunningham, Jerome Robbins, Anthony Tudor, and Frederick Ashton, among others. A report from 2016, the most recent I have, shows that 95 licenses were issued for the premiere performance of Balanchine ballets throughout the world. And this doesn't count the works, Balanchine works already in the repertories of some of these companies. So yes, throughout the world. For it is a cardinal truth that, except in the rarest cases, a ballet must be performed to live. That's the end.
Thank you.
So we have time for a few questions if you want, or not, or if you have any. Yes?
Nancy, why don't you tell us what it was like to, when you were in the corps de ballet, what it was like to be in the room with Balanchine for rehearsal or when he was creating a ballet on you?
Well, the thing of it was, he was around all the time. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like the entrance of the king. He was there, he was a workman. He was around all the time, teaching or administration. Sometimes he was sitting in his office. So, everybody thought, everybody worshipped him, it's not that, but it's not like a once in a lifetime moment. He was there. But yes, everybody stopped and listened when he walked into a room, everything dead silence. And it was, amazing. He could work through the most confusing moments. People could talk, people could come in and out. Some choreographers, they shut the door, nobody can come in, they have to think. He would do his thing. But whatever went on, and then he would sort of choreograph a few things and people would go through them, and they wouldn't, of course, get it right at first, and somebody would have an arm here and a leg there, and so he knew so much what he wanted to do that it didn't bother him that it wasn't perfect the first time at all, and that people talked and so on. He was the most focused person I think I've ever known. It was, of course, very inspiring. I didn't work with that many other choreographers, but people who have say they were so slow, and he was so fast. It didn't seem fast when you're standing there, and you've been standing there for quite a while. But compared to others, he made, people would say he made a whole variation in an hour, let's say, or something like that. I didn't experience that precisely because I always kind of had him. I did not work much with Robbins, I must say, but there were some other choreographies for New York City Ballet. But everybody who was there and who stayed there, a few people left, they got fed up. Well, to be completely dominated like that, you're a mature human being, and to have somebody else control your life to that extent can be very trying. But you knew he was a genius, or those of us who stayed, and it was worth it. Maybe it was not a particularly balanced life, but to have those moments, frankly, a lot of people never have such moments, I imagine. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but it was hard work. He was very, he never stamped, he never shouted. Every once in a while he'll go, bam, 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 I want the timing like that, but that's about it. And he wasn't really, quote, temperamental. As I say, you could talk and walk around and so on and so forth. But everybody knew what they were getting. Pure gold. So. Yeah.
If you think it's appropriate, Nancy, I was so fascinated by your telling me something about your videos of notable dancers, and I assume Melissa is one of those?
Yes,
or?
we got Melissa.
Yeah, if you would tell a little bit more about that work, it would be...
Well, yeah, some years ago, first of all, there's the Balanchine Foundation, which was founded in, I said before, 87. And at a certain point I became involved with it, and I had an idea for a program which was to take veteran Balanchine dancers who were still alive but elderly, probably, if possible the original casts. And in this instance we had Violette and Jean-Pierre were original cast, Melissa and Jacques were original cast of Stars and Stripes. Anyway, but not, you couldn't always get the originals, but if possible, the people on who he actually made the great choreography, to come and teach and coach today's dancers in some of these steps and some of the things he said in rehearsal. And because to have them come and just talk about it is only half the show, you know. The fact was that these young people could do the steps. They could talk about them and what Balanchine wanted. I mean, it's all at least one remove. I mean, it's not, you know, whatever was in his head we couldn't get at, but it seemed possible that his first ideas as carried out in choreography, even if he changed later, because he did change a lot, was worth capturing. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 20-ish years. But we have Melissa, we have Violette, we have Jean-Pierre, and lots of others, Freddie Franklin and Maria Tolchief, and so on and so forth. So, and that's an ongoing thing, as long as we can get dancers. Some of them, of course, have died, and sooner or later we'll probably run out of the supply, but then the ones who worked with him. So.
And are those films available? I mean, would you be able to show those sometime, or?
Yeah, in educational circumstances. They're not for commercial sale.
Yeah.
Because we, you know, it was sort of too complicated, and also people were dying, and we didn't want to take the time to sort of negotiate with unions and things like that.
Yeah.
So they are available in libraries,
Okay.
and you know, you're allowed to show them in a classroom like this. But no, they're not for sale on the street, so to speak, or in the store. But the interviews are, just the coaching sessions.
Interviews?
Interviews are online,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Balanchine Foundation has a website.
Okay. So we can watch them, or the
Yeah.
transcripts, okay.
You can watch them.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So, I mean, this was, this thing is on. I mean, well, this is part of the tape, original tape. She coached, she and Jacques, no, Jacques wasn't there, sorry. She, and who did she do it with? Conrad? Maybe she did it on her own, I can't quite remember, it was an early tape. At any rate, she went through this whole thing of demonstrating, coaching, and people would try to do, we had Gillian Murphy and Peter Bowl were the dancers on whom she was giving this information. And then afterward, we would have an interview for the coach to say things that perhaps they hadn't been able to say on the floor. So they refer to things that maybe you haven't seen, because like she was saying, well, Jacques said, or as we just did. Well,
Yeah.
so, yes.
Nancy, just because it's so interesting and without getting into any gory details, would you just talk a little bit about Balanchine and his many wives?
I don't know that I'm competent to do that. I mean, he obviously was attracted to women, and most of his ballets, I mean, he did have some terrific parts for men, that's not to say he didn't, but for him, the woman was the central character. I think he was the most interested in women, in what they could do. I mean, actually, the thing he did for Jean-Pierre was really excellent, I think. Beautiful choreography, and Jean-Pierre does it very, very well. But a lot of variations, male variations, you'll have, you know, they come in, they do a few pirouettes, and they do a few leaps, and they do a few beats, then they run to the corner and they do them the other way. Even in Balanchine and in the classical ballets, that's all the variation, all the male variations are that way. So he was in love with, I don't know whether a woman or with women in general. But yes, I mean, I don't, you know, he had 4 legal wives and 1 cohabitation that we know of, and God knows what else he was doing. But the original wife, Tamar Jiva, that we married when they were still in Russia, and she was supposedly 15, and he wasn't much older. And then she was one of the people with him who went to the West and didn't return. And another person was Alexandra Danilova, who we think is probably a much better dancer than Tamar Jiva, her first wife. And so then she was the one that they lived together, and he didn't actually marry her for some time. And then Vera Zorina, they did marry, and then Maria Tolchief. And along the way, who knows, he was, certainly when I was in the company, he was infatuated with Allegra Kent. She was just coming up, and I'm not necessarily talking about romance or sex, but he certainly was absolutely fascinated with her body, and it was obvious, because he would teach class sometimes. And he would concentrate on those people he was interested in, and it was pretty obvious who they were. And as anybody who follows that company knows, the next person after Allegra, or at least very soon after, was Suzanne Farrell, with whom he was more than infatuated. And then that ended. He always said his wives left him. I don't know if that's true. He never left them. I have no, who knows. But anyway, Suzanne was out of the picture after a while, and then he took up with Karen von Arldingen. And they weren't married. In fact, she was married to somebody else. But people said, I actually alluded to that in the beginning, because he was almost brought up without a family, because the father was often away. Then he goes to this boarding school, and I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine that it didn't influence him in some way. And so people said that Karen von Arldingen, who was married with a child, provided a family in his old age, and he spent Easter with them and this, that, and the other thing. And he, of course, he wouldn't take an inferior dancer. She was a star of many of his ballets. I don't think she was as great a dancer as Suzanne or even Allegra, but I mean, she was, you know, he did ballets for her. I mean, it wasn't just a practical kind of thing as far as I can see. And I know that he was extremely fond of her, because I actually went to visit him in the hospital when he was terminally ill, and so did others, it wasn't just me, and he was really out of it, and he started talking about Karen. Where's Karen? Yes?
Now, when did you start dancing?
Start dancing?
Yeah.
Always in the company.
When was your, when did you believe that you wanted to be a dancer?
Oh, well, I was very, an unusual situation in that my first ballet teacher was Tanika Leclerc.
Wow.
Wasn't she married to him?
Yes. Oh, did I leave her out? I'm sorry.
I was wondering.
I didn't even think of it. It was kind of by accident. It was, I was in a little theater school where we did a little dancing, and the directors were friends of Tanika Leclerc's mother, and sort of said she'd like to try her hand at a little ballet teaching. She was about 21, absolutely gorgeous, and you know. And that did it. I mean, that just did it. And I think we only had I think the class only lasted about 4 months or something, but I was bitten. And eventually I got to the School of American Ballet, not right away, because my mother didn't think it was a good profession. But anyway, and the years I was in the company were 57 to 61. So. Anything else? We probably ran out of time or something.
Well, may I say, I know I shouldn't take up any valuable time, but I want to say that I went to school with this luminary, and everything I know about ballet, and I'm not saying it's a huge amount, but I learned from you, and we went to watch her dance from school. She did not graduate from, we went to Brearley, and she went to the children's professional, right?
Yeah.
And so we went faithfully to watch her dance. I remember that as if it were yesterday.
Yeah.
And I want you, I'm going to pump her because she's modest. She is one of the world's authorities on dance. She has written encyclopedic books, so Google Nancy Reynolds. You really literally know fast. I did before I came to learn a little bit more that I didn't know. Do read about it. They're just some of the most wonderful books that she's written, and she's still writing. So.
Well, thank you.